Like, the ending of this was so disappointing. It kind of feels like the author gave up, if I'm being honest. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today. And for this video, we are going to be doing my September wrap up. Alright, before we get to anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments how many books did you not finish in September. Okay, so first off, can we talk about how insane it is that it's already October? I'm over the moon about it, but I also feel like September came and went so quickly. That said though, I am ready. I am ready for October reading. I am so excited. Let's wrap out September, starting out with my stats. So for September, I read 14 books, and across those, I read 4,160 pages. That does include converting audiobook hours, 2 pages, but in regard to audiobook hours, I listened to around 68 hours. I had a really great average rating this month of 4.04 stars. Unfortunately though, I did have 2 DNFs. Now when it comes to my genre breakdown, I was pretty flexible this month. I had 2 fantasies, 1 horror, 3 manga, 1 mystery, 4 romance, and then 3 sci-fi. For the little goals I keep for myself, I did read a book that was longer than 450 pages. I did read a comic or manga. Unfortunately though, I did not read a nonfiction book. And then when it comes to my series stats, I continued with 5 installments. I did manage to finish 1 series, so that's great. A little reminder for y'all, I only talk about books in my wrap-ups that I didn't talk about in specific videos. For example, I had a Star Wars reading vlog that came out this month. I had an anticipated releases vlog. If you want full reviews of those books, go check out those videos. I'll put links to them in the cards. And then let's go ahead and start out with my actual reviews for this month. And I think I'm gonna go based on genre. Let's start at the bottom with sci-fi. I did obviously have 1 Star Wars book this month, but apart from those, I reread All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first in the Murderbot Diaries, and I actually reread this on audio because I was forcing my boyfriend to listen to it with me whenever we were driving out to a state park that was a good ways away. If you're somehow unaware of Murderbot, it is following this security unit who has somehow hacked its government module so that it can't be controlled by the owners of the company anymore. Even though they don't have to, they do continue to take security jobs, but on the side they do what they want, which is essentially consuming as much media as possible, and I greatly appreciate that. Unfortunately though, these pesky humans that they're helping on their current job, Murderbot kind of becomes a little attached to them. I enjoyed this just as much the second time around. Actually, probably a little bit more, I think, just because I know so much of what grows in the series from the first book, how some of the relationships Murderbot starts here really develop. So I really enjoyed getting to reread this. Adore Murderbot. They were one of my favorite characters of last year, and they continue to be one this year as well. Here's hoping that at some point I can continue the series with Josh, because that'll be really fun. He did enjoy it, and so I think that would be a great time for both of us. I bumped my rating for this one up to a 4.5 star. The other sci-fi book that I read was Gemina by Amy Kaufman and Kristoff. This is the second book in the 𝗖mě Files series. I read this as a part of the Squash That Series readathon that I partook in this month. I'll put a link to my vlog up above. I liked this a lot, I did, except the plot of this feels exactly the same as the first book. And it's not, because we're following completely different characters. We're in a different part of space, but once again, we're following 2 teenagers who have some romantic tension and end up in the middle of a security disaster. I do understand what's happening in the grand scheme of the plot within the series, but it takes you a while to actually reach that point. But until that point, it felt like we were seeing the same storyline from 𝗖mě, but playing out with different characters. I don't mean that to be a necessarily bad thing, because it's been a good few months since I read the first book in the series, and thankfully I enjoyed this just as much as 𝗖mě. I thought it was a really fun time, a good time getting to know these characters and watching the banter and seeing their interactions, the relationship between them improve. I also love the fact there was more of the die-hard bits that we got to see a little bit of in 𝗖mě. A portion of the plot was extended in Gemina, and so I had a lot of fun there. But when we're at the final conflict and the ending of the book, I don't really feel like this progressed the actual plot of the series very much. There's a little bit there. We move forward a hair, but not really enough for me to understand why this book is another 600 pages. The story itself is told in a way that is very bingeable. It is multimedia format. The audiobook is very well done also. I highly recommend, if you can, listening to the audiobook and reading it physically. Definitely a phenomenal experience with the story. And that's why I read it so fast. That's why I had a good time while I was reading it. But again, when I finished, I couldn't help but draw the comparison that this is just like the first and we really didn't go anywhere. I actually think even some of the twists were done in a similar way. Like the context around those twists is obviously different, but because they're handled so similarly, and it didn't make those twists and turns as impactful. So this ended up being a 4-star. Again, I guess really I would say more like a 3.75. I still enjoyed this. I am going to finish out the series with the last one, but I'm a little apprehensive just because is that one also going to have the same layout of a storyline? I just think the space away from the story will do me good, if that is in fact what's gonna happen. Next up, let's look at the romance books I read this month, which there were a lot, honestly. I am still continuing to do my Buns and Roses TBR jar challenge. If you're unaware of that, I'll put a link to it in the cards. Boils down to the fact I'm going to be attending a romance book tea, and I'm trying to read the highest rated book from every author that is in attendance at the tea. First one I read this month was Calculated Collision by 𝗖cie his𝘁𝘁, that's right. This is a second chance romance in which we're following an FBI agent, Lee, who ends up running into an old friends with benefits at a crime scene of all places. And unfortunately, he has to be put into protective custody. And even though Lee continues to say she is not interested in any sort of a relationship, forced proximity to this very handsome man makes that really difficult for her. All the while, there is an overarching plot about a mole in the FBI that is making their lives a lot more difficult. The setup of this was very much up my alley, romantic suspense with like thriller. It sounds like a good time. There's a great amount of spice in this book. I just wasn't really sold on the romance between these two. I liked both main characters. I thought each of them were quite well characterized. I thought they had solid personalities. And in the very beginning, I enjoyed seeing their interactions. I thought they had some fun banter. But unfortunately, where this fell down for me is the fact that they jump into bed together so fast. There's not enough time to really build the tension of the forced proximity that I enjoy. Seeing as how they do start sleeping together so quickly, it was kind of hard for me to really believe that Lee was trying to, keep some separation from him. It did not seem like she was trying very hard to resist a relationship. Honestly, this book kind of started to feel more like erotica than a romance book because so many of their interactions just ended up devolving into sex. Not really what I went into the story wanting. I thought the thriller setup was quite well done, especially with having the perspective of the mole. I thought that was really cool. But unfortunately, I think the fact that we, the readers, know who the mole is kind of ruins the suspense. You're waiting for the other characters to put everything together and figure this out. So I do think this author had good writing chops, and there's some aspects of the thriller parts that do have me intrigued to try out some of her other stuff, and she definitely can write some good smut. The plot of this one is kind of where this fell down for me. I did read a fair amount of it, so I am gonna say I give it 3 stars. Unfortunately though, I did kind of skim like the last 35% of the book though. Also for my Buns and Roses TBR challenge was Mad Plaid and Dangerous to Marry by Elizabeth Essex. This is the 4th in the Highland Brides series, which was my first Highlander romance, and honestly it went pretty well. At the start of the story, we are following Lady Greer, who is traveling to finally meet her betrothed in person for the first time and marry him. However, on her way there, she and her family end up coming upon an injured man with amnesia. Greer helps heal him a bit, but then he is taken away by a local. Then when they arrive at the castle, she comes to find out that Ewan, the man she is supposed to be marrying, has passed. However, Greer is not really buying Ewan's cousin's story and starts to investigate this situation, as well as the mysterious man with no memory of his past. In between each chapter is actually a letter exchange between Greer and Ewan, and we get to see how these two to have fallen in love slowly through their letters for the past 10 years, which is an aspect of the story I really enjoyed. The novel itself is a little too drawn out, especially because a lot of the reveals in the plot aren't really shocking. I mean, every single twist in the story I totally expected. So it kind of felt like the middle really dragged out when the characters are having to put everything together, but I already knew everything that was going to happen. I also think the way Spice was written was just like a little too flowery for me. It came across more romantic than really spicy in my opinion, and that's just not really my taste. I'm sure some people would enjoy it, just not for me. But again, I did actually really enjoy most of this book. Essex made some really well nuanced characters that came off the page, and I was very impressed at how she managed to handle this amnesia trope while also convincing me of a relationship between Ewan and Greer. I've seen previously that the amnesia trope can be really hard to manage because, you know, how can you convince me that these two are falling in love when the man doesn't even know who he is? As I said, I'm also always a fan of letters in my romance books, so I really enjoyed seeing those included in here as well. I think they definitely helped to convince me of this relationship that Greer and Ewan have developed over the years, even though they never officially met in person. But because the story was a little bit drawn out, I think as we reached the end of the story, the letters started to become more of a hindrance than a help. As I said, I don't think anything in the plot really surprised me. I expected every twist and turn this took. But even with that, I did enjoy watching the story play out. I liked watching these characters fall in love, especially once Ewan's friends got involved. I really enjoyed seeing the mystery element of the story, and then the climax part at the end was pretty exciting. It was a good time. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I don't know if I necessarily will continue with the series. This is one that I'm gonna probably put in my maybe pile, but I would be interested to read more of this author's work at the very least. Also, during that Squash That Series reading vlog, I read A Lot Like Adios by Alexis Daria. This is the second book in the Premium is a Power series, where we are following Michelle, who has just recently started her own marketing firm, and she gets hired by her childhood best friend Gabe's company. These two used to be so incredibly close, but then right when Gabe was going to college, they finally took a jump into making things a little bit more romantic between the two of them. But unfortunately, Michelle finds out that Gabe is going across the country for college, and that sort of exploded, and they haven't spoken since. Michelle agrees to the job, but also is desperate to try and reconnect with Gabe, rekindle this friendship. So she says yes. He has to come stay with her in New York while she is working on marketing his gem. Unfortunately though, Michelle is currently staying at her parents' house. Gabe's parents live next door, and they are a big reason of why Gabe left. So there was a lot of familial drama going on in this one. And honestly, across the board, I did really enjoy this. I do think Daria tends to rely on lack of communication between her characters a little too much for me. That was an issue I had with the first book in the series as well. Even with that though, I did really like both the main characters. I thought these two had phenomenal banter. I really liked seeing little snippets of their life when they were younger. They really connected over this TV show that was a Latin cast and was sci-fi focused. So we get to see a little bit of their adoration for that show, and also the fan fiction that they write for it, which was really cute. Whenever this got steamy, it definitely got steamy. Very much enjoyed that. Did feel like in the middle things were a little overwritten. I did find myself skimming occasionally just because certain scenes felt drawn out. I enjoyed the majority of the story. It came out to a strong 4-star. I'm definitely intrigued to pick up the last book following the final prima of the trio. Next up, also a part of my Buns and Roses jar, I read Kiss Me Lady One More Time by Marlowe. And first off, I love this title. It's so freaking cute. So this one is a Regency romance that also has a mystery element going on, in which Barrett's best friend owned a fossil that has disappeared after a party, and Barrett blames himself because while he should have been watching the fossil, he ended up flirting with the gorgeous Penelope, and now he, along with his friend, are having to figure out what happened to it. Penelope kind of ends up inserting herself into the mystery as well. I really liked this one. It was one of those books where I felt like they connected on such an intellectual level that whenever things took a turn for the physical and this got a little spicy, it genuinely took me off guard. Also, I mean, this wasn't over the top spicy, but the spice that was there, very good. I mentioned in my short that this is a Regency romance between two nerds, and I'm gonna sell it like that again because it's so true. They had great chemistry. I really loved that they had so much respect for one another, but I also could have done without Barrett's constant "I'm not good enough for her" concerns, though I actually really appreciated how that issue was handled. The way Barrett was called out for what he was doing to protect himself. And I think it also just showcased how well layered of a hero he was. On the opposite side with Penelope, I was initially a little nervous because when we first started getting to meet her, she's not really the kind of heroine I enjoy. She initially came across a little too naive, but she actually had a really strong head on her shoulders and she was willing to fight for a relationship with Barrett, and I loved seeing those interactions specifically. Like I said, there is also a mystery going on throughout that initially I was really expecting to be quite predictable, but it ended up taking a turn that I did not see coming, made the mystery a lot bigger. It might have been a hair on the dramatic side. Even still, it was pretty fun. This one also came out to a strong 4-star. I kind of want to recommend it to the STEMinist girls because there's that nerdy bits going on there, but also a really cute romance. So, you know, if you're an 𝗖cie Hazelwood fan and you want a Regency, this might be the book for you. Finally, the last one of the jar was Close to Danger by Suzanne Ferrell. And this is the 4th in the Weston series, I believe. We're following Chloe, who apparently earlier in the series had a bit of a fling with Wes while attending her sister's wedding. Wes is a deputy in Weston and works with Chloe's sister. During their little fling, Wes found out that Chloe is actually being stalked. And he has since kind of taken it upon himself to try and help her. Nothing's really taken a violent turn, so Chloe hasn't been able to contact the police, but she is starting to get more and more concerned that things will as the story starts. A blizzard is coming into Ohio at the start of the book, and Wes ends up taking it upon himself to basically rescue Chloe and takes her up to his cabin. But once arriving there, come to find out Wes has his own issues he's dealing with thanks to his own stalker, basically. I'll be honest, this was very fine for me. I think both the main characters had pretty well created personalities and their chemistry, it was okay. I wasn't really swooning over them. They had some fun banter here and there, but a lot of the times I just felt very meh on their interactions. I definitely did not understand the necessity of having so many perspectives in this book. I do tend to like dual perspective when reading a romance, but this had dual perspective with Wes and Chloe. Plus we got numerous side characters. Both of Chloe's sisters, one of their husbands, a man who's helping protect her younger sister, the stalkers, some people in town whenever they're up in Weston. Like, there were just so many side characters who had a perspective that I did not think were really necessary. Some of them I imagine are the focus of the prior books in the series or the future books in the series, and I guess maybe the author was trying to introduce you to them early, but I still don't think that was really needed when it came to characters from prior books. Maybe if I had read those prior books, I would enjoy getting to see more of those romances, but having just started in the middle, which isn't usually my style, it's purely for this project, felt like a needed filler. The suspense element was well built. I think especially at the start of the book, it's really unsettling. I mean, who doesn't get freaked out by the idea of a stalker? But then when the extra perspectives were added in, things just really started to drag out. The second suspense plotline actually ended up taking precedence, I don't know, maybe around the midway point. It got way more focus, was a lot more exciting, and so I was really tied into the story then. But because of that, it didn't really leave a lot of time to wrap up everything that was happening with Chloe's stalker. In the end, the answer is like the most obvious person, and also doesn't actually make a lot of sense if you think about it psychologically. This is one of those books in a romance series where I feel like maybe you actually do need to read the whole series in order to enjoy them more. It came out to a 3-star from me. It wasn't really my thing. Next, let's talk about the mystery, which was another draw, and that was An American in Scotland by Lucy Conley. This story is the first in a cozy mystery series, which I was really nervous about because cozy mysteries and I don't tend to get along. We're following this woman. Her life is kind of imploded and she's running away to this very small isle in Scotland to become the village doctor. Once arriving there and accidentally stumbling upon a body, comes to find out she is also the coroner. This was an easy enough mystery with an average Jane for the main character. It honestly hit everything I expect from a cozy mystery. It had a little bit of romance being hinted at. The Scottish setting was different, I'll say that. The number of references to British crime shows, I'm sure some readers would absolutely love, but I just felt really meh on this in the end. The main character, Dr. M, kind of waffles back and forth between being like this brilliant empath with loads of experience in absolutely everything to a total idiot. I wanted to like her. I wanted to connect with her. But it was really hard because she either came across too perfect or insanely stupid. She apparently took the job as village doctor without really doing any research or reading the contract at all, which like I cannot fathom doing that. And she also takes it upon herself to start investigating what happened to this person, partly to clear her own name because she's the only outsider of the village and she's the one who found the body. And also partly despite the handsome constable who is honestly a pretty big ass to her for half the book. There's a little bit of tension between those two that I imagine is going to develop into a romance in the later books in the series, especially since Dr. M has sworn off men after everything that happened in her past, which honestly was somehow the most dramatic and over-the-top background whenever you finally learn it. And it also kind of felt like it played into some biphobia that I wasn't really a fan of. I did think that M and the constable had some fun banter at times, I will admit. So like there was something there to, you know, develop into more in the future books. I do think this is also one of the few cozy mysteries I've read where the numerous side characters actually felt like they had pretty good personality. M makes friends with multiple different women in the village, and there was this really cute sleepover scene in the middle that I really liked. And plus it also kind of helped out with the investigation, finally started to push us towards getting some answers. However, I did find it very odd that numerous times cheating was brought up with some of these side characters and M, and it was kind of like excused away in a very nonchalant way that just like that just raised my hackles, made me uncomfortable. I didn't like that. The mystery itself was intriguing enough. There were plenty of suspects, there were plenty of reveals done throughout to kind of make me think like, oh, okay, this person could be it. Oh, okay, this person could be it. The final twist did pleasantly surprise me, I will say. Rounding this out, basically, if you like cozy mysteries, perhaps you would enjoy this. It definitely was not for me. Plus those two issues I pointed out really just left a sour taste in my mouth. So this came out to about a 2.5 star. I think I initially rated it a 3, but especially now looking back at my review, I think I had more negative things than I initially thought. Yeah, 2.5 stars feels more comfortable. Okay, then manga. I read volume 19 and 20 of Soul Eater by Atsushi Okubo. I've talked about this series so many times now, but fantastical world. There's a person who's a meister of a weapon. Weapon is also a human. They work for Lord Death. By this point, the story has evolved so freaking much from where it starts. Starting in volume 19, we get to see some really awesome development of Kid, who is a Shinigami himself. We get to see him finally using some of those powers, and oh, it was so good. Also, probably some of the best scenes of Blackstar, another Meister in the series. He usually drives me crazy, but this is probably the most mature and showcased how much he's grown throughout the series. So I was really impressed with that. I honestly had to give this one 5 stars because I had so much fun with it. It was really good. Volume 20 continued some of the battles that we started with 19. Ooh, some of them are really gory for this series. So freaking good as well. This one felt like one of the most mature volumes of the series thus far, and I actually really liked it for that because it kind of feels like, you know, the characters have matured throughout the series, so artists is drawing them experiencing also becomes more mature. The character exploration around Soul, who is one of my favorite characters, was fun. I really liked getting to learn more about his backstory and also just seeing how important his relationship with Maka is to him. So good. They're partners and they're two of my favorites. I love watching their relationship grow throughout the series. This one also was a big ol' 5 star. And then finally is fantasy. And the last book I also read for that Squash That Series vlog. And it finished out a series on a very low note, unfortunately. That was Children of Anguish and Anarchy by Tomi Adeyemi. Doubly hurts because this whole series is so freaking pretty. But so in this world, we are following 𝗖cie, who have magical abilities, but when the series starts, those have been gone for about 20 years after a war. The princess of the land actually ends up finding this artifact that could possibly bring the magic back, and things grow a lot from there, not necessarily for the best. Like I said, this is the final book in the series, and it starts out on an interesting foot in a way that I thought the author was kind of paralleling the Atlantic slave trade. But almost immediately it took a turn and it felt so disconnected from the prior 2 books in the series. All of the events of the last 2 books almost felt inconsequential for what was happening here. The plot that is finished out here starts here. So it doesn't really connect with the prior two books. There's the introduction of a new villain, one who is woefully underdeveloped. There was also an introduction of more magic that we hadn't seen previously that, again, doesn't really get dived into very much. The characters are there. 𝗖cie just doesn't feel like the 𝗖cie that you meet in the first book anymore. I felt like the character redemption arcs we could have seen for Anan and Amari were so disappointing. There's some exploration of Amari's sexuality in this one that I did think was cool to include, though again, underdeveloped and kind of came out of nowhere. Rowan, a character that was very prevalent in the second book, literally doesn't exist here. It almost felt like the author completely forgot about him and just, you know, didn't even bother writing him. And then the ending, it just ends. Like, it leaves so much unresolved. There are so many questions remaining. Like, the ending of this was so disappointing. It kind of feels like the author gave up, if I'm being honest. The ideas and my love for the first book is honestly the only thing that kept this at a 3-star. Otherwise, this would have been a 2. I am so sad for how the series ended. And unfortunately, it was a really sad note to end on because that is it. That's all the books I read this month. So on that note, thank you so much for coming to my channel today, y'all. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let's leave, oh God, a cup emoji. Let's do a cup emoji in the comments. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!